From Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our discussions of the films, the feature films of that great filmmaker and artist, the one, the only, Mr. Brian De Palma. And that brings us to a title which has been released, or it was released in 1969. And so when it's regarded in the context of the filmography of Brian De Palma, it is discussed with reference to that year. And so in the order of filmography, it does come in that year. However, we understand that it was made prior to, some years prior to such release date. And so it's often regarded as, in that way, in terms of production dates in history, the first feature-length film that Brian De Palma was involved in. And I'm speaking of this work, which is The Wedding Party. And what a fascinating, interesting film this is in its own way, as well as in the context of Brian De Palma's filmography. Now, before we get into a specific discussion of this in the latter half of this video, let me say very generally, for those, for example, who have not yet seen this film, you may, of course, know other works of Brian De Palma, but maybe if you haven't seen this film yet, if you like the works of Brian De Palma, this is another very fascinating and interesting place to go. As I mentioned, it has a lot of fascination to it because of the early aspect where it sits in the De Palma filmography, also in the context of the production history and the dates. Again, often regarded as being the first foray into feature filmmaking for De Palma. I should mention that the directors are credited to Cynthia Munro, Brian De Palma, and Wilfred Leach. And also according to materials, for example, I've seen online, for instance, the year 1963 cited. But if you look, for instance, in the booklet, which is part of this great Arrow Blu-ray box set release, which is right here, by the way. According to this booklet, the essay on The Wedding Party by Brad Stevens, on page 8, it says that The Wedding Party was shot during the winter of 1964 and the summer of 1965, and then with editing being completed the following year. The film has a 1966 copyright date, and so, but then there were certain situations or circumstances that arose which led to the release of the film in April 1969. So it is a work that has a great cast as well. Joe Clayburgh, Charles Pfluger play the main couple, the young couple here, regarding which this wedding party is taking place. But there are also other actors that appear, and indeed some of these other actors are names that we might recognize in terms of other works by Brian De Palma. So I mentioned, for example, Jennifer Salt and William Finley and Robert De Niro. And so we have, and other people in the cast. So we have, of course, the association, the great association of Brian De Palma works and Jennifer Salt, and the number of films that she will appear in, or she has already appeared in. And then, of course, the great collaboration between De Palma and De Niro. And of course, we see in this box set from Arrow a kind of collection of these early works. And then also we might see in the subsequent filmography of De Palma another collaboration between the two. And of course, the great collaboration between William Finley and Brian De Palma. This is one of the great director-actor duos, I think. And it's great to see this, even in the early stages, so to speak, of the filmography, there's still a lot of lightning and a lot of energy and electricity with regard to this and the other director-actor collaborations that we see combined here in The Wedding Party. And then also I should say, too, that as a general proposition, this film is, I think, sitting very comfortably and very well in the context of De Palma's filmography. While it's not per se a thriller or a suspense mystery, it is a comedy, and it does have that episodic sketch comedy feel to it that is very zany, that relies on a sense of, say, broad comedy or physical comedy that also has intersected with it a type of clever dialogue. And that dialogue and comedy combination is further amplified by the way in which style amps it up, in a manner of speaking. So the application of jump cuts, the application of quick edits, the application of use of setting that is then employed and even manipulated for purposes of, again, furthering the episodic comedic nature of the humor of these various episodes, and the zigzag of form and substance when combined with the human drama and the characters, and of course the relationships between and among couples. So in that way, this is very much a Brian De Palma film. And it also has a lot of fascination, I think, too, because there are a lot of ways in which, in terms of the style as well, this has a lot of through line with the subsequent works of De Palma. And too, there are a number of interesting points about the film itself in terms of the role reversals and sort of the idea of marriage versus quote unquote maybe the single life and family life, and all that such situations, relatively speaking, imply respectively. So for these and other reasons, I would strongly recommend visiting The Wedding Party, especially if you are interested in the works of Brian De Palma. Arrow, as I mentioned, has this great option here. There are other ways, I think, to watch it, but I recommend this because it has a great package, and of course you can get this with other films in the De Palma film canon, again, if you're able to get this set. But in any event, however you're able to watch it, I strongly recommend this work, which is again released in 1969, and that is The Wedding Party. Okay, so you're back. So that means that you're okay with a discussion with a little bit more detail of The Wedding Party. Again, this is a film that is focusing in on the wedding. Well, it's in the title, The Wedding Party, or the planned marriage between the characters played by Charles Pfluger and Joe Kleberg. So this is Charlie and Josephine, the groom and the bride. And we have the family house and the visit of the family, the bride's family. And we have this a great setting, outdoor location, a huge house, a type of almost mansion-like house with many family members, and also of the bride and family members and friends of the bride, and also a small number, relatively speaking, of associations of the groom as well. And so we have this mix of cultures, almost maybe a clash of cultures, excuse me, if you will, because we have the people on the bride's side and also the people on the groom's side. And when they meet and interact, that's where you have all this maybe ado to do regarding scenarios and episodes that form the structure of this film, The Wedding Party. And so we have also, in terms of structure, we have the way in which this film is almost divided into a type of chapters or a type of sections that are dedicated to various, say, specific and documented modes of the formality of the wedding and the pre-wedding, formal process that involves a type of tradition or citing of tradition. And we see how this citing of tradition through title cards seems to be consistent with or clashing with the actual events that we see unfold before our very eyes. And that kind of clash also forms a sense of irony and drama, and also humor and comedy going forward. And also that humor and comedy too, when we see the clash, we also see clash of characters done in a very spirited and humorous way. So we have, and I think one of the memorable aspects of this is the groom's entourage, or the groom's associations, and this is of course the characters played by William Finley and Robert De Niro, and they form a type of unit or a duo or a combination that seems to be almost flip-flopping in terms of their perspectives. You know, on the one hand, at the very start, of course, they are representing a type of perceived freedom that they perceive to be associated with the single life, and so the idea of the bachelor life for Charlie will soon be at an end. And this might be something to be lamented, or the final moments of bachelordom should be celebrated in terms of a night out, as it were. But slowly but surely, or gradually as the film progresses, the roles reverse, do they not? Because Charlie at the start, who seems to be very much into getting married and settling down and meeting his wife to be Josephine, the Joe Kleber character, gradually the roles are reversed. So towards the latter half, we see Charlie maybe finding some kind of regret, or maybe having second thoughts about getting married, especially with the perceived notions of for lack of a better phrase, sort of the life of being married, and what the responsibilities are, and the financial responsibilities are for doing for being in that kind of relationship. Whereas as the film progresses, we have the two friends, the William Finley character and Robert De Niro character, Alistair and Cecil, and how they tend to go on the other side, and where they might have thought of being proponents of the single life, now they seem to be more willing to accept the positives of settling down, and being in a sort of more permanent relationship like marriage. So those role reversals are very interesting, and they also form a sense of the zaniness and the sort of zigzag nature of the film itself. Again, it has a kind of structure to it, but it also has role reversals and an episodic comic sketch comedy feel about it, because of the wide array of characters that we meet and the intersection and cross section between and among them. So I like that clash, and that clash also has a sense of a feeling off kilter balance, because of the way in which roles are reversed and perspectives become skewed, so that characters that have a certain perspective on the one side, one part of the film, might have a different perspective at the film's end. So that adds to the further sense of zaniness and the comedic timing. Again, Brian De Palma is a filmmaker that is focusing too throughout his filmography career on comedy, on aspects of comedy and role reversals. And so, in that way, I'd like to suggest that The Wedding Party is very much sitting comfortably in the context of the Brian De Palma film canon. And as I mentioned before, this is a film that is credited to Cynthia Monroe, Brian De Palma, and Wilfrid Leach. And so, this is. The associations and the creation of this film, and the importance of, say, Sarah Lawrence College with these associations and filmmaking crew, and Brian De Palma, you can find it in, for example, the great booklet that's part of this Arrow box set release. This is also a reminder too of the strong association that Brian De Palma has with Sarah Lawrence, and also the way in which filmmaking can also be a type of learning exercise or experiment. In many ways, too, The Wedding Party could be seen in that vein. We might see another film down the line in Brian De Palma's filmography which has a similar type of background in terms of its production, a la producing a film in the way, or learning by means of doing. And I'm speaking of a film that will come some years later, which is called Home Movies. But we'll talk about that when we get to that one. It's another very interesting film. And it's great too to see, I mentioned the great associations with the great actors that we see here. So Jill Clayburgh, whose appearance here is really quite wonderful and lovely, and she has the role, I would say, is quite a challenging one, because she needs to be a type of center. And she is the center around which things are happening. And so maybe on paper it might not seem like there is much to do with the character, especially when compared to, I'd say, the other characters in the film. But it's one of the great strengths that her presence is very key and central to the events of The Wedding Party, and Charlie, and what it is he's doing and thinking, etc. And so it's great to see Jill Clayburgh in this performance in a type of, relatively speaking, early role. But she, of course, is wonderful in this performance, and she does an excellent job here. Again, highlighting the crucial nature and the importance of Josephine, and how she seems to be associated with everything, and all the thinking and perspectives and the changes that are going on with characters like Charlie, etc. And then I should mention too, Jennifer Salt. Jennifer Salt is someone that we saw very briefly in the film Murder à la Mode. And of course, we see her here in terms of The Wedding Party, again, made in the early 1960s, but then released in 1969. And we also see Jennifer Salt in other works by Brian De Palma that we will talk about, say, in later discussions in this video series. Very important association, so it's great to see her here. And of course, I mentioned Robert De Niro, again, who has some really wonderful scenes. He might be, relatively speaking, maybe a supporting character in terms of the relative running time that his character is given on screen. But when he's on screen, he's Robert De Niro, so you can recognize him immediately. and it is also an earlier role, so he's very much a type of, he has a boyish charm to him, and it's wonderful. There's a scene in particular where you see him in shorts and high socks, so it's wonderful to see Robert De Niro in shorts and high socks as well. So it has that one, and note too the name spelling of Robert De Niro in the credits, so very interesting indeed. And then I should mention too the great collaboration between De Palma and William Finley. And William Finley has this great look about him. It has this almost this quirky intellectualism about, which is perfect, which is absolutely perfect for his character, and it adds a sense of the sort of unexpected to the proceeding, which is also perfect in the context of a Brian De Palma film. And of course, William Finley is just magnetic, and he's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So it's great to see him too. There's a sense of a constant type of assurance, and you feel welcome. It feels very much like home, when you see William Finley in a Brian De Palma film. So it's wonderful to see that. And I should mention too, the style of this has such a great frenetic, cutting feel to it. It's great to see the way in which De Palma and company are using the camera and editing techniques in order to augment certain sequences, even within the same space. So, for instance, there is a sequence involving a large sort of banquet or large dinner where all the characters are sitting around the table and talking. They're sitting in various places, but the camera almost has a type of staccato rhythm in the way it cuts, and it doesn't do a clean cut in a completely different direction, but it kind of cuts, and then midway it cuts like this, in a manner of speaking. So we still have cuts on the same action, but maybe different characters are then included or disregarded, etc., while another character is in the middle or something like that. So there's a really interesting sense in the way in which cuts are cutting on the same action, but yet at the same time not on the same action. And I should mention too, there's some interesting sequences involving discussions in a garden area, where you have cuts that are from the same perspective, but the characters are then switching roles and switching positions, but the dialogue is still continuing. So we have this way in which space and people are being manipulated within the same area by virtue of the edit, by virtue of the cut, but still the dialogue is going on. So there's a sense of sort of a quote unquote non-traditional or non-linear way in which linear storytelling is taking place. And so I really enjoy that. We do see that also in films like, say, Greetings, early on in that film, where you have the discussion between among the three main characters in a type of clothing store, and it then cuts, and the dialogue remains constant, but the people are switching places, or the camera is seemingly jumping to a different perspective, and people in the background seem to be switching roles as well. So you have cuts on the same action and on the same set of dialogue, but then you have different perspectives within the same space. So that is also very fascinating. And it becomes to a way in which this film itself is very entertaining in terms of spotting these wonderful camera and cinematic styles. And then also it's a reminder too of the type of camera manipulation, cinematic manipulation, poetic manipulation, that is in many ways one of the core set pieces of Brian De Palma's filmmaking to the max. And it's really wonderful in that way. So we get that here, and it's done, I think, very well, very imperceptibly, but if one notices it, it becomes very noticeable. And I love that. I love how this is a film that is about a human drama. It's about role reversals. It's about relationships. It's about the way in which relationships change, especially in the context of a wedding. It's about the wedding formalities, and it's about meeting the family of the bride to be, and these are going to be your in-laws as well. And so that that type of comic tension is arising. I love that aspect, but also there's the style aspect. There's the cinematic aspect. There are the things about the editing, the tricks, the camera work, the way in which things are positioned, the framing, that is also very much part of the fun of watching a Brian De Palma film. And this is, I think, no exception to that. This is also very fun to watch as well as to experience as a drama. And then two, the other techniques as well. There are what might be described as speeding up the camera. There's almost a sense of a silent film comedy in certain aspects. For instance, the beginning with the car, it's driving off from the ferry. And so we have different styles, which could be said to be like homages or references to other cinematic traditions, which is also very much a part of the fun of watching The Wedding Party in its own right, as well as a reminder of the way in which this film can be said to be sitting very comfortably in the context of De Palma's filmography, because as we know, De Palma also is someone that we shall see paying great respect and homage to, say, other cinematic traditions say, in the early part of the history of cinema. So it's great to see that combination as well. And also, speaking of homages, I think a lot of references made to Godard, Jean-Luc Godard, during this early period of Brian De Palma. And I think the essay that Brad Stevens wrote, A Life in Cinema, A Cinema in Life, again with the booklet that is accompanied with this great Arrow box set, he does mention to the Godard style, which could be the Nouvelle Vague style of this, for example, the fast cutting that has an almost meta aspect to it. But also, I like the reference to Jean Renoir and the rules of the game, and there's a sense too of class formalities, of the social niceties that seem to be turned on their heads in a very gradual, but also sometimes very sudden and a very unexpected way. And that suddenness or that unexpectedness or that turning the societal niceties on their heads, that becomes part of the humor and charm and the wit of this film. And also too, Brian De Palma's films are very much too about relationships and relationships between people. And so we have here various relationships and even changing relationships or attempts at switching roles here. So this is also very much too a part of the fun of the film, as well as the way in which we can say this is part of Brian De Palma's filmography. So for these and other reasons, it's, I think, well worth checking out The Wedding Party if you can. It might not be, say, when compared with other Brian De Palma films, again, for some it might be a curiosity. For some it might be an example of the early period of Brian De Palma, a sign of things to come. And if you feel that way, if you consider this to be quote unquote minor in the context of Brian De Palma's filmography, that is totally okay. That's very legitimate. That's very reasonable perspective to have. But I would also like to suggest that there are many ways in which one can see this film in its own way, on its own merits, and also looking at it as not just a quote-unquote minor work, but in fact a very significant work as it sits in the context of the filmmaker of the stature that is Brian De Palma. So, my dear friends, this is a quick discussion of the film that is The Wedding Party. So let's continue on with our Brian De Palma video discussions going forward with the next one. But until the next video, my dear friends, please, I hope that you are happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including Brian De Palma movies. So until the next one, my dear friends, thank you and cheers.